I learned that night that some men carry their dead with them, visible only to those cursed enough to touch their skin. And I learned, too, that love can bloom even in the shadow of a ghost. The Black Hound sat at the edge of nowhere, a crooked tavern where the Yorkshire road bent toward the moors and most travelers chose to press on rather than stop. I had worked there since I was 16, serving ale to coachmen and stew to merchants who barely looked at me, a girl with no family name and no prospects beyond these smoke-stained walls. My father had been the barkeep before his heart gave out, and the new owner, a thick-necked man named Godfrey, kept me on because I was cheap, and I knew how to keep my mouth shut when the conversations turned toward smuggling or debts or the kind of business that required discretion. I was 23 that autumn, old enough to know that my life would likely continue in this vein, until I was gray and bent, wiping tables and avoiding the hands of drunk men, invisible to the world beyond this drafty, lamp-lit room. It was the 3rd of November when the storm came. I remember because the calendar on the wall, a gift from a traveling preacher, showed a saint whose name I had forgotten, and I had marked the days in pencil, counting toward nothing in particular. The rain had been falling since morning, a cold, relentless curtain that turned the road to mud and the sky to iron. By evening, the wind howled through the eaves, rattling the shutters and sending the fire in the hearth into wild, leaping shadows. Godfrey had gone to visit his sister in the village, leaving me alone with the silence and the storm. I did not mind. Solitude had become a kind of companion, familiar and undemanding. I was wiping down the bar when I heard the sound of hooves and wheels, slow and labored, struggling through the mire. A carriage, I thought, though few were foolish enough to travel in such weather. I set down my rag and moved to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The shape that emerged from the darkness was a black brougham, its horses wild-eyed and steaming, its driver hunched beneath a sodden coat. It stopped directly in front of the tavern, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and a man stepped down into the mud. He was tall, dressed in a long traveling coat that clung to his frame like a second skin, his hat pulled low over his face. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in his movements, the way he glanced over his shoulder before crossing the threshold, as though he expected to be followed. The door swung open with a gust of wind and rain, and he stood there, dripping and pale, his eyes sweeping the room with a kind of desperate urgency. I had seen many men pass through the Black Hound, but none like him. There was something in his bearing, a refinement that spoke of wealth and breeding, and something else, too, a kind of haunted exhaustion that made my breath catch. "Please," he said, his voice low and rough, as though he had not spoken in days. "A room, if you have one, and something warm to drink." I nodded, unable to find my voice for a moment. We had 3 rooms upstairs, all of them empty. I gestured toward the fire and told him to sit, that I would bring him tea and see to his belongings. He did not argue. He moved to the hearth like a man in a trance, sinking into the chair nearest the flames and staring into them as though they held answers to questions I could not hear. I busied myself with the kettle, my hands trembling slightly, though I could not say why. Perhaps it was the strangeness of his arrival, or the way the storm seemed to have delivered him to my door like a secret. When I brought the tea, he looked up at me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in damp strands, and eyes the color of smoke, gray and fathomless. He was handsome in a severe, angular way, but it was not his features that held me. It was the look in his eyes, a mixture of fear and sorrow so profound that it seemed to pull at something deep inside me, some instinct I had not known I possessed. He thanked me quietly, wrapping his hands around the cup as though it were a lifeline. "You are far from the main road," I said, my voice soft, tentative. "Most travelers do not stop here." He did not answer at first. He drank the tea slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire, and I thought perhaps he would not speak to me at all. But then he said, without looking at me, I needed to stop somewhere no one would think to look. The words sent a chill through me, though I could not say why. I should have been alarmed, should have asked him what he meant, but something in his tone told me that he was not dangerous, not to me. He was a man in flight, that much was clear, but from what, I did not know. I took a step back, unsure of what to say, and he seemed to sense my hesitation. He looked up at me then, and for a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a strange, inexplicable pull, as though he were reaching out to me across some invisible distance. "Forgive me," he said. "I did not mean to frighten you. I will pay for the room and be gone by morning." I shook my head, though I was not sure what I was denying. "It is no trouble," I said. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need." He studied me for a long moment, and I had the strangest feeling that he was seeing me, truly seeing me, in a way that no one had in years. Then he said, "What is your name?" The question caught me off guard. Men of his station did not ask barmaids their names. I hesitated, then said, "Elsie. Elsie Turner." He nodded slowly, as though committing it to memory. "I am Ashford," he said. "Ashford Greaves." The name meant nothing to me then, though I would later learn that he was the heir to a great estate in Lincolnshire, a lord with lands and title and all the privileges that came with them. But in that moment, he was simply a man who had stumbled into my small, dim world, carrying a weight I could not yet comprehend. I told him I would prepare his room, and he thanked me again, his voice barely above a whisper. As I turned to leave, he spoke once more. "Miss Turner," he said, and I stopped, looking back at him. "If anyone should come asking for me, would you tell them I am not here?" The request was strange, but I nodded. "Of course," I said. "No one will know." He seemed to relax, just slightly, and I left him by the fire, climbing the narrow stairs to the room at the end of the hall. It was small and plain, with a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was clean, and the window looked out over the moors, where the rain still fell in sheets. I lit the lamp and turned down the coverlet, then paused, my hand resting on the windowsill. Something about him lingered in my mind, a sense of unease mingled with curiosity. I had lived my entire life in this place, serving strangers and asking no questions. But this man, this Ashford Greaves, had awakened something in me, a desire to know, to understand. When I returned downstairs, he was still by the fire, but his posture had changed. He sat rigid, his head tilted as though he were listening to something I could not hear. I approached slowly, and he turned to me, his face pale, his eyes wide. "You should leave this place," he said suddenly, his voice urgent, "before dawn. It is not safe." I stared at him, bewildered. "Not safe?" I said. "What do you mean?" He stood abruptly, his hands clenched at his sides. "I cannot explain," he said, "but you must trust me. Go to the village. Stay with someone, anywhere but here." I should have been afraid, but instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I stepped closer to him, close enough that I could see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tremor in his jaw. "My lord," I said gently, "you are not well. Whatever you are running from, it cannot reach you here." He looked at me then, and I saw something break in his expression, a kind of anguish that tore at my heart. "You do not understand," he said. "It is not something I am running from. It is something I carry with me." Before I could ask him what he meant, he reached out, his hand closing around mine. The touch was electric, a shock that ran through my entire body, and in that instant, the world shifted. The firelight dimmed, the warmth of the room receded, and I saw her. She stood behind him, just over his left shoulder, a woman in a white gown that clung to her body as though she had been pulled from water. Her hair hung in dark, wet tangles around her face, and her skin was pale as bone, her lips tinged with blue. But it was her eyes that held me, dark and accusing, fixed on Lord Ashford with a gaze so full of sorrow and rage that I felt it like a physical blow. She did not move, did not speak, but her presence filled the room, cold and suffocating, a weight that pressed down on my chest and stole my breath. I gasped, jerking my hand away, and the vision vanished. The room snapped back into focus, the fire crackling, the rain drumming against the windows. Lord Ashford stared at me, his face stricken, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that he had seen the recognition in my eyes. "You saw her," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Dear God, you saw her." I could not speak. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking, and all I could think was that I had touched him and seen a ghost, a specter that clung to him like a shadow. I had heard stories of such things, of spirits bound to the living by grief or guilt, but I had never believed them. Now, standing in the dim light of the Black Hound, I knew they were true. "Who is she?" I managed to say, my voice barely audible. He sank back into the chair, his head in his hands. "Her name was Catherine," he said, "and I am the reason she is dead. I should have fled that room, should have put distance between myself and this man who carried death like a cloak, but I did not. Instead, I found myself moving closer, drawn by a compulsion I could not name, a need to understand what I had seen. The specter had vanished, but I could still feel her presence, a coldness that lingered in the air like the memory of winter. Lord Ashford sat hunched in his chair, his shoulders trembling, and I realized with a start that he was weeping. Silent tears that tracked down his face and disappeared into the shadows. I knelt beside him, my hand hovering near his arm, uncertain whether to offer comfort or to withdraw. "Tell me," I said softly. "Tell me what happened." He looked at me then, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate, and I saw in them a plea for absolution that I was not certain I could grant. "She was to be my wife," he said, his voice thick with grief. "Catherine Ashworth. We were engaged to be married, had been since we were children. It was an arrangement between our families, but I grew to love her. She was kind and gentle, everything a man could want in a companion." He paused, his hands gripping the arms of the chair until his knuckles turned white. "But I was young and foolish," he continued. "I did not understand what I had until it was too late. There was another woman, a widow from the village near my estate. She was beautiful and worldly, and I, God help me, I was flattered by her attention. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was merely a dalliance, but Catherine discovered the truth. I felt a pang of sorrow for the woman in white, for the betrayal she had suffered. "What did she do?" I asked. "She confronted me," he said. "It was late summer, August of last year. We were at a house party at her family's estate in Derbyshire. She asked me to walk with her by the lake, and I thought she wanted to discuss the wedding. Instead, she told me she knew everything. She was calm at first, heartbreakingly calm, and she asked me if I loved the widow. I could not answer. I could not lie to her, but I could not tell her the truth either, and so I said nothing." His voice broke, and he covered his face with his hands. "She walked away from me," he said. "She walked toward the water, and I called after her, but she did not stop. I thought she needed time, that she would return when she had composed herself, but she did not return. They found her the next morning, floating among the reeds, her gown spread around her like a shroud. The inquest ruled it an accident, said she had slipped on the muddy bank and struck her head, but I knew the truth. She had walked into that lake because of me, because I had broken her heart beyond repair." I sat back on my heels, my mind reeling. The image of the specter made terrible sense now. The wet gown, the accusing eyes, the sense of sorrow that clung to her like fog. "But you did not push her," I said. "You did not cause her to fall." He shook his head violently. "I might as well have," he said. "My betrayal killed her as surely as if I had held her beneath the water. And now she follows me, a constant reminder of what I have done. I see her every day, every night, standing just beyond my reach, watching me with those terrible eyes. I thought if I left my estate, if I put distance between myself and that cursed lake, she might release me. But she is here, Miss Turner. She is always here." I did not know what to say. I had spent my life in a world of solid, tangible things, of ale and bread and the rough wood of the bar beneath my hands. Ghosts were stories told by the fire, warnings to children to behave or to travelers to avoid certain roads. But I had seen her, had felt the icy grip of her presence, and I could not deny what my eyes and my heart knew to be true. "She haunts you," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue, "because you have not made peace with what happened." He looked at me with something like hope, fragile and fleeting. "How does one make peace with the dead?" he asked. "How do I atone for a sin that cannot be undone?" I did not have an answer. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, and moved to the window, staring out at the storm. The rain had lessened, but the wind still howled, and the darkness beyond the glass was absolute. I thought of Catherine, of the life she might have lived, the happiness she had been denied, and I thought of Lord Ashford, carrying his guilt like a stone around his neck, unable to rest, unable to forgive himself. "Perhaps," I said quietly, "she does not want you to run. Perhaps she wants you to remember." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Will you help me?" The question startled me. I turned to face him, my heart pounding. "Help you how?" I asked. "I do not know," he admitted. "But you are the first person who has seen her, the first who has not thought me mad. Perhaps there is a reason you were meant to see her. Perhaps you can help me understand what she wants." I should have refused. I should have told him that I was a simple barmaid with no knowledge of spirits or the mysteries of the dead. But when I looked at him, I saw not a lord or a gentleman, but a man broken by grief and guilt, and I felt a connection to him that defied reason. "Very well," I said, "I will try." Relief flooded his face, and he stood, crossing the room to take my hand once more. This time I was prepared for the vision, but it still stole my breath. Catherine appeared again, closer now, her face inches from Lord Ashford's, her expression one of such profound sadness that I felt tears spring to my eyes. But there was something else, too, a kind of longing, as though she were reaching for something she could no longer touch. I studied her, trying to understand, and then I saw it, a faint mark on her temple, a dark bruise that stood out against her pale skin. "She struck her head," I said aloud, and Lord Ashford flinched. The inquest was right about that, but I do not think it was an accident. He stared at me, his grip tightening. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said slowly, "that I do not think she slipped. I think she walked into the water deliberately, but not to end her life. I think she was trying to wash away the pain, to find some kind of solace. And she struck her head on a rock or a branch, and the water took her." "How can you know that?" he whispered. "I cannot," I admitted. "But I feel it. When I touch you, when I see her, I feel what she felt. And she was not angry when she walked into that lake, my lord. She was heartbroken." He released my hand and turned away, his shoulders shaking. I wanted to comfort him, but I did not know how. Instead, I said, "She needs something from you, something more than apologies or guilt, but I do not yet know what it is." He nodded, his back still to me. "I will stay here," he said, "until we understand, if you will allow it." I agreed, though I knew it was a dangerous decision. Godfrey would return in a few days, and I would have to explain the presence of a gentleman in our rooms, but I would manage it somehow. What mattered now was unraveling the mystery of Catherine's death, of understanding why she could not rest. I told Lord Ashford to retire for the night, that we would speak more in the morning, and he obeyed, his movements slow and weary. I watched him climb the stairs, and then I returned to the fire, sitting in the chair he had vacated, my mind racing. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the dying embers, listening to the rain and the wind, and thinking about the woman in white. I thought about her life, the promise of marriage and happiness torn away by betrayal, and the despair that must have driven her to the water's edge. And I thought about Lord Ashford, a man who had made a terrible mistake and was now paying the price in ways he could not have imagined. I wondered what it must be like to be haunted, to see the face of the one you had wronged every time you closed your eyes, to feel the weight of their sorrow pressing down on you like a shroud. As dawn broke, pale and tentative, I rose and began preparing breakfast, more out of habit than hunger. Lord Ashford appeared shortly after, looking even more haggard than the night before. He thanked me for the food, but ate little, his gaze distant. I wanted to ask him more about Catherine, about their life together, but I hesitated, unsure of how to broach the subject. It was he who finally spoke. "There is something I did not tell you last night," he said, "about the widow." I set down my cup, giving him my full attention. He hesitated, then said, "Her name was Annabel Thorne." She was not what she seemed. I learned after Catherine's death that Annabel had been involved in certain practices, spiritualism, seances, that sort of thing. Some said she was a medium, that she could speak to the dead. A chill ran through me. "Did you ever attend one of her gatherings?" I asked. "Once," he said. "Catherine and I both did at Annabel's invitation. It was meant to be an entertainment, a parlor game, but something happened. Annabel claimed to contact the spirit of her late husband, and Catherine became upset. She said it was wrong, that we should not tamper with such things. I thought she was being overly pious, but now I wonder if she sensed something I did not. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. Do you think Annabel had something to do with Catherine's death? He shook his head slowly. I do not know, he said. The affair between us ended soon after that séance. Annabel became strange, possessive. She spoke of binding us together, of rituals that would ensure we could not be parted. I told her I could not continue, that I intended to honor my engagement to Catherine. She was furious, but she did not threaten me. She simply disappeared. I have not seen or heard from her since. My mind raced with possibilities. Could Annabel have cursed Lord Ashford, bound Catherine's spirit to him as some kind of revenge? It seemed far-fetched, the stuff of Gothic novels, but I had seen the specter with my own eyes, had felt the unnatural cold of her presence. I could not dismiss the possibility. We need to find Annabel Thorne, I said. If she is a medium, she may know how to release Catherine's spirit. Lord Ashford looked at me with a mixture of hope and dread. And if she will not help us? He asked. Then we will find another way, I said, with a conviction I did not entirely feel. Over the following days, Lord Ashford and I fell into an uneasy partnership. Godfrey returned and was suspicious of my guest, but a generous sum from Lord Ashford's purse silenced his questions. We spent our time researching spiritualism and the practices of mediums, reading what little material I could find in the village lending library, and discussing the details of Catherine's life and death. Lord Ashford told me everything he could remember, the sound of her laugh, the way she loved to walk in the gardens at her family's estate, the small kindnesses she had shown to servants and tenants alike. With each story, I felt I came to know her, this woman who had been wronged and who now existed in a liminal space between life and death. And with each day, I felt myself drawn closer to Lord Ashford. He was not the cold, distant aristocrat I had imagined lords to be. He was thoughtful and deeply troubled, but also kind, treating me with a respect I had never known from men of his station. He asked about my life, my father, my dreams, and listened as though my words mattered. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, to the moments when his face would soften and I would glimpse the man he might have been, had tragedy not claimed him. But Catherine was always between us, a presence neither of us could ignore. She appeared to him more frequently now, standing in doorways, reflected in windows, always silent, always watching. I could only see her when I touched him, and each time I did, I felt her sorrow more keenly, a grief so vast it seemed to encompass the world. I began to dream of her, of dark water and pale hands reaching upward, of a voice calling out a name I could not quite hear. I woke from these dreams with tears on my face, feeling as though I had lost something precious, though I did not know what. One evening, as we sat by the fire, I took Lord Ashford's hand and allowed the vision to come. Catherine stood beside him, her gaze fixed on his face, and I studied her carefully, looking for any sign of what she wanted. And then I saw it, a faint glimmer at her throat, a locket on a delicate chain. I blinked, and the vision faded, but the image remained burned in my mind. She wore a locket, I said. Did you give it to her? Lord Ashford's face went pale. Yes, he said. It was a betrothal gift. Inside was a portrait of me and a lock of her hair. She was wearing it when they found her. Where is it now? I asked. He looked away. Her family kept her belongings, he said. I could not bring myself to ask for it. I think, I said slowly, that she wants it returned. Or perhaps she wants you to see it, to remember the love you shared before everything went wrong. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I will write to her family. I will ask if I may visit, if I may see her things. Perhaps you are right. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of hope and trepidation. We were beginning to understand, but I feared that understanding alone would not be enough. Catherine's spirit was bound to Lord Ashford by something more than grief, something that required more than memory or regret to break. And as I sat there, watching the firelight play across his troubled face, I realized that I was no longer simply helping him out of pity or curiosity. I cared for him, deeply and irrevocably, in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. I was falling in love with a man haunted by the ghost of the woman he had betrayed, and I did not know if there was any future for us beyond the shadows. That night, I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the wind and thinking of Lord Ashford, of Catherine, of the tangled threads that bound us all together, and I wondered, not for the first time, if I had the strength to see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by a rider who looked at the black hound with barely concealed disdain before departing into the grey morning. Lord Ashford took it with trembling hands, and I watched as he broke the seal and read the contents, his face growing paler with each line. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, the paper hanging loose in his grip. "They have agreed to see me," he said finally, his voice hollow. "Catherine's mother, Lady Ashworth, has invited me to call at their estate. She says she has something she wishes to give me, something Catherine left behind." A mixture of relief and apprehension washed over me. This was what we had hoped for, a chance to uncover more about Catherine's final days, perhaps to find the locket and whatever message or meaning it might hold. But I also sensed the danger in this journey, the reopening of wounds that had barely begun to scar. "When will you go?" I asked. "Tomorrow," he said. "The estate is in Derbyshire, 2 days' travel from here. I wondered if you might accompany me." The request caught me off guard. "Me?" I said. "My lord, I am a barmaid. I cannot simply appear at a lady's estate as though I belong in such company." He looked at me then, and I saw in his eyes a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "You are the only person who can see her," he said quietly. "The only one who understands what I am enduring. I cannot face this alone, Miss Turner. I need you with me." I wanted to refuse, to remind him of the impossibility of what he was asking, but the words would not come. The truth was that I wanted to go, wanted to help him, wanted to be near him despite the complications and the impropriety. And so I found myself nodding, agreeing to a journey that would take me far from the only home I had ever known, into a world where I did not belong. Godfrey grumbled when I told him I would be away for a week, but the coins Lord Ashford placed on the bar silenced his objections. I packed my few belongings in a worn carpet bag, my hands shaking slightly as I folded my best dress, a simple grey wool that I had sewn myself. It was not fine enough for a lady's drawing room, but it would have to do. As I prepared to leave, I caught my reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes bright with something I dared not name. I looked, I thought with a pang of wonder, alive. We departed at dawn, the carriage rolling smoothly over roads that grew wider and better maintained as we moved south. Lord Ashford was quiet for much of the journey, staring out at the passing countryside with a distant expression. I did not press him to speak, sensing that he needed the silence to gather his thoughts. Instead, I watched the landscape change from the wild moors of Yorkshire to the softer hills and valleys of Derbyshire, marveling at the world beyond my small corner of it. On the second day, as evening approached, Lord Ashford finally spoke. "I have not been back to this place since the funeral," he said. "I could not bear it. The thought of seeing the lake, the house, all the places where she and I, where we were happy." "You loved her," I said gently. "That is not something to be ashamed of." He turned to me, his eyes shadowed. "But I hurt her," he said, "and that love, that happiness, it was not enough to keep me faithful. What kind of man does that make me, Miss Turner?" I considered his question carefully. "It makes you human," I said at last. "Flawed and foolish, perhaps, but human. We all make mistakes, my lord. The question is whether we learn from them, whether we find a way to make amends." He smiled then, a faint, sad curve of his lips. "You are wiser than you know," he said, "and kinder than I deserve." I felt a warmth spread through my chest at his words, and I looked away, afraid of what he might see in my face. The carriage continued on, the wheels clattering over cobblestones as we entered a village, and then we were turning onto a long drive lined with ancient oaks, their branches forming a canopy overhead. At the end of the drive stood the Ashworth estate, a grand manor of grey stone with tall windows that glowed with lamplight. My breath caught at the sight of it, this place of such beauty and such sorrow. We were greeted at the door by a butler who regarded me with thinly veiled curiosity, but said nothing. Lord Ashford introduced me as his companion, offering no further explanation, and the butler led us to a drawing room where Lady Ashworth awaited. She was a woman in her 50s, dressed in black mourning that seemed to have become a second skin, her face lined with grief, but still handsome. She rose when we entered, her gaze sweeping over me before settling on Lord Ashford. "Lord Greaves," she said, her voice cool but not unkind, "it has been too long." He bowed, his movements stiff. "Lady Ashworth," he said, "thank you for receiving me. May I introduce Miss Elsie Turner, my companion?" Lady Ashworth's eyes flickered to me again, and I saw the calculation there, the assessment of who I was and what I meant to Lord Ashford. But she merely inclined her head and gestured for us to sit. "I have thought much about your letter," she said, addressing Lord Ashford, "about whether it was right to allow you to return here after everything. But in the end, I realized that Catherine would have wanted it. She was always too forgiving, too willing to see the good in people." Her words were a subtle rebuke, and Lord Ashford flinched. "I am deeply sorry," he said, "for the pain I caused her, and for the pain I have caused you and your family." Lady Ashworth waved a hand, as though brushing away the apology. "Words cannot undo what has been done," she said, "but perhaps understanding can bring some measure of peace. That is why I asked you to come. There is something you should know, something Catherine told me in the days before she died." My heart began to race. Lord Ashford leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "What did she tell you?" he asked. Lady Ashworth's gaze grew distant, as though she were looking into the past. "She said that she had seen something," she said slowly. "During that séance at Mrs. Thorne's house, she would not tell me what, only that it had frightened her, that she felt as though she had glimpsed something that should have remained hidden. She became convinced that Mrs. Thorne was dangerous, that she was not merely playing at spiritualism, but was engaged in something darker." I felt a chill run through me. "Did she confront Mrs. Thorne?" I asked, forgetting for a moment my place. Lady Ashworth looked at me, her expression unreadable. "She did," she said. "Catherine went to see her the day before the lake. She would not tell me what they discussed, but when she returned, she was agitated, almost frantic. She said that Mrs. Thorne had made threats, that she had spoken of binding and punishment, of ensuring that certain debts would be paid. I thought it was merely the ravings of a jealous woman, but now I wonder if there was more to it." Lord Ashford had gone very still. "You think Annabel had something to do with Catherine's death?" he said. "I do not know," Lady Ashworth admitted. "The inquest found no evidence of foul play, and Mrs. Thorne was not even in Derbyshire at the time. She had returned to her home in Yorkshire. But Catherine's state of mind, her fear, it has haunted me. And there is one more thing." She rose and moved to a small escritoire in the corner of the room, opening a drawer and withdrawing a velvet box. "This is what I wish to give you," she said, returning to Lord Ashford and placing the box in his hands. "It is Catherine's locket, the one you gave her. She was wearing it when they found her, but I had it cleaned and kept it safe. I thought perhaps you might want it as a remembrance." Lord Ashford opened the box with shaking hands, and I saw the locket glinting in the lamplight, a delicate piece of gold on a slender chain. He lifted it out, and as his fingers closed around it, I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch him, to see what Catherine would show me now. I reached out, placing my hand over his, and the world shifted. The drawing room vanished, replaced by a moonlit garden. I saw Catherine, alive and beautiful, walking along a gravel path. She was not alone. Annabel Thorne was with her, a woman of dark beauty with sharp features and eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. They were arguing, their voices low but intense, and I strained to hear the words. "You cannot keep him," Catherine was saying, her voice trembling. "Whatever you have done, whatever hold you think you have over him, it will not last. I will marry him, and you will have no place in our lives." Annabel laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You think marriage will protect you?" she said. You think your little prayers and your piety will shield you from what I have set in motion? I have bound him to me, Catherine, with ties that go deeper than flesh or vow. And if you try to break them, you will pay the price. Catherine's face went pale. You are mad, she whispered. I will tell everyone what you are, what you do in that house of yours. Annabel stepped closer, her expression one of cruel amusement. And who will believe you? She said. A silly girl who sees demons in parlor tricks? No one, Catherine. No one will believe you. But I will give you a choice. Walk away from him, release him from your engagement, and I will leave you in peace. Refuse, and you will suffer a fate worse than any you can imagine. Catherine shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I will not abandon him, she said, no matter what you threaten. Annabel's smile faded, replaced by a look of such malevolence that I felt a wave of fear. Then so be it, she said. You have made your choice, and you will live or die with the consequences. The vision ended abruptly, and I gasped, pulling my hand away. Lord Ashford stared at me, his face ashen. What did you see? He demanded. I told him everything, my voice shaking, and Lady Ashworth listened in horror. When I finished, she sank into her chair, her hand pressed to her mouth. Dear God, she whispered. Annabel Thorne. She cursed Catherine. Not cursed, I said slowly, the pieces coming together in my mind. She threatened her, drove her to despair. Catherine went to the lake not to escape you, my lord, but to escape Annabel, to find some kind of peace. And when she died, Annabel bound her spirit to you, as revenge for your rejection, as punishment for Catherine's refusal to step aside. Lord Ashford looked at the locket in his hand, his expression one of anguish. Then how do I free her? He asked. How do I break the binding? I did not have an answer, but Lady Ashworth spoke, her voice steady despite her distress. You must confront Mrs. Thorne, she said. You must make her release Catherine's spirit. It is the only way. Lord Ashford nodded, his jaw set with determination. Then that is what I will do, he said. I will find Annabel Thorne, and I will end this, no matter the cost. I felt a surge of fear at his words, but also a fierce pride. He was willing to face the woman who had destroyed so much, to risk whatever danger she might pose, for the sake of the woman he had wronged and the peace she deserved. And I knew, in that moment, that I would stand beside him, no matter what horrors awaited us. We spent that night at the Ashworth estate, and I lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling and thinking of what we had learned. Annabel Thorne was no mere spiritualist or jilted lover. She was something far more dangerous, a woman who wielded forces I did not understand, who could bind the dead to the living and twist grief into a weapon. The thought of confronting her filled me with dread, but I could not turn back now. I had seen too much, felt too much, to abandon Lord Ashford to his fate. In the morning, we prepared to depart. Lady Ashworth gave us the direction of Annabel Thorne's residence, a house on the outskirts of a village near the moors, not far from the Black Hound. The coincidence chilled me, the realization that we had been so close to her all along, that she might have been watching us, even as we struggled to understand Catherine's haunting. Lord Ashford thanked Lady Ashworth for her hospitality and her honesty, and she embraced him briefly, a gesture of forgiveness that brought tears to his eyes. As we rode away from the estate, I looked back at the grand house and thought of Catherine, of the life she had lost, and the spirit that still lingered, trapped by malice and sorrow. I promised myself, silently, that I would help Lord Ashford free her, that I would see this through to the end. And perhaps, if we succeeded, if we could break the binding and lay Catherine to rest, there might be a future for us, a chance at happiness built on the foundations of atonement and understanding. But first, we had to face Annabel Thorne, and I knew that the confrontation would test us in ways we could not yet imagine. The journey back to Yorkshire felt longer than it had any right to. Each mile weighted with anticipation and dread. Lord Ashford and I spoke little, both of us lost in our own thoughts, preparing ourselves for what lay ahead. I found myself studying him in the dim light of the carriage, the sharp line of his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes, the way his hands gripped the edge of the seat as though anchoring himself to something solid. He was afraid, I realized, truly afraid. And that fear made him more human, more real to me than any title or estate ever could. We arrived at the village near Annabel Thorne's residence as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. The inn where we took rooms was a shabby place, smaller even than the Black Hound, and the landlord eyed us with suspicion when Lord Ashford asked about the widow who lived in the old manor on the edge of the moor. "He knows her," the landlord said, his voice low. "Most folk round here do, and most stay clear of her. Strange things happen in that house, lights in the windows at odd hours, sounds that ain't natural. If you've got business with her, my lord, I'd advise you to reconsider." Lord Ashford thanked him, but did not heed the warning. We retired to our separate rooms, and I lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and wondering what the morning would bring. I thought of Catherine, of her spirit trapped in a prison of Annabel's making, and I thought of Lord Ashford, who had carried that burden for over a year. I wanted to give him peace, to give them both peace, but I did not know if I had the strength or the courage to face what awaited us. Sleep came fitfully, and with it came dreams. I saw Catherine again, but this time she was not silent. She spoke to me, her voice soft and sorrowful, carrying across some vast distance. "Help him," she said. "Free him, so that I may be free as well." I woke with her words echoing in my mind, and I knew that whatever happened, I could not turn back. At dawn, Lord Ashford and I set out on foot, following the narrow road that led across the moor to Annabel's house. The morning was cold and damp, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. The landscape was bleak, nothing but heather and gorse stretching toward the horizon, broken only by the occasional outcrop of dark stone. As we walked, I felt a growing sense of wrongness, a prickling at the back of my neck as though we were being watched. Lord Ashford felt it too. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his eyes darted to the shadows. The house appeared suddenly, rising out of the moor like a monument to decay. It was a large structure, once grand but now fallen into disrepair, its windows dark and lifeless, its walls stained with moss and damp. The garden that surrounded it was overgrown, choked with weeds and brambles, and the air itself seemed thicker here, harder to breathe. I shivered, drawing my shawl tighter around my shoulders, and Lord Ashford reached out to take my hand. "Are you certain you wish to do this?" he asked, his voice low. "I would not blame you if you chose to wait outside." I shook my head. "I am with you," I said. "Whatever comes." He squeezed my hand, and together we approached the front door. It opened before Lord Ashford could knock, swinging inward on silent hinges, and a voice called out from within, smooth and mocking. "Do come in, Lord Greaves. I have been expecting you." We stepped into a hall that smelled of dust and something else, something acrid and unpleasant. The interior of the house was as neglected as the exterior, the walls hung with faded tapestries, the floor littered with the remnants of past grandeur. Annabel Thorne stood at the far end of the hall, framed by the light from a window behind her. She was just as I had seen her in my vision, a woman of dark beauty with sharp, elegant features and eyes that gleamed with intelligence and malice. She wore a gown of deep purple, cut in a style that was almost theatrical, and she regarded us with an expression of amused contempt. "My lord," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth, "how good of you to visit. And you have brought a companion, how charming. Tell me, my dear," she said, turning her gaze to me, "are you his new conquest, or simply a servant playing at being more?" I felt my cheeks flush with anger, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I am neither," I said evenly. "I am here to help Lord Ashford free Catherine Ashworth's spirit from the binding you placed upon her." Annabel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, how delightful," she said. "The little barmaid fancies herself a spiritualist. Tell me, child, what do you know of bindings, of the forces that hold the dead to the living?" "I know enough," I said, though my voice trembled slightly. "I know that you threatened Catherine, that you drove her to despair, and that when she died, you used your knowledge to trap her spirit, to torment Lord Ashford for rejecting you." Annabel's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "Rejecting me?" she said. "Is that what he told you? That I was some spurned lover, desperate and vindictive?" She turned to Lord Ashford, her eyes blazing. "You know the truth, Ashford," she said. You know that what we shared was more than a mere dalliance. I gave you everything, opened doors to knowledge and power that you could not have imagined, and you cast me aside for a simpering girl who did not have the courage to embrace what she truly was. Lord Ashford's jaw tightened. I made a mistake, he said. I should never have become involved with you, should never have allowed myself to be drawn into your world. But Catherine was innocent. She did not deserve what you did to her. Innocent? Annabel spat the word. She was a hypocrite, hiding behind her piety while condemning those who dared to seek truth beyond the veil. She came to me, you know, after she learned of our affair. She demanded that I release you, that I step aside like some obedient servant. And when I refused, when I told her that you belonged to me by right of ritual and will, she threatened to expose me, to destroy everything I had built. So you killed her, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. Annabel turned to me, her expression unreadable. I did not kill her, she said. I merely ensured that she understood the consequences of her actions. I told her that if she did not release you, if she insisted on marrying you, she would suffer. And suffer she did, tormented by visions and fears until she could no longer bear it. She walked into that lake of her own accord, Miss Turner. I merely planted the seeds. You cursed her, Lord Ashford said, his voice shaking with rage. You used your rituals to break her mind, to drive her to her death. Annabel shrugged. I showed her the truth, she said. I showed her the darkness that waits for us all, the emptiness beyond the grave. And yes, when she died, I bound her spirit to you, so that you would never forget what you had done, what you had chosen. Release her, Lord Ashford said, his hands clenched into fists. I am begging you, Annabel. Let her go. Annabel studied him for a long moment, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that might have been pain or regret. And what will you give me in return? She asked softly. What will you offer to free the woman you claim to have loved? Anything, Lord Ashford said. Name your price. Annabel smiled, but it was a sad, bitter smile. There is only one thing I want, she said. The one thing you cannot give me. Your love, Ashford. Your true, freely given love, not bound by ritual or obligation, but real and whole. And we both know that is impossible now, do we not? She looked at me then, and I saw understanding dawn in her eyes. You love her, she said, gesturing to me. This common girl, this nobody. You have given her what you could never give me, what you took from Catherine before she even had the chance to claim it. How perfectly cruel. Lord Ashford did not deny it. He looked at me, and I saw the truth in his eyes, the affection and the longing that mirrored my own. I do, he said simply, and I will not apologize for it. Annabel's face twisted with anguish, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was a woman who had loved and lost, who had turned her grief and rage into something dark and consuming. But sympathy could not change what she had done, could not undo the suffering she had caused. You must release Catherine, I said, stepping forward. Not for Lord Ashford, but for her. She deserves peace, a chance to move beyond this world and find rest. Surely you, of all people, can understand that. Annabel's gaze shifted to me, and I saw the conflict there, the struggle between her desire for revenge and something deeper, something human. You speak as though you know me, she said, but you do not. You do not know what it is to lose everything, to be cast aside and forgotten. I do, I said quietly. I have lived my entire life as nothing, as no one. I know what it is to be invisible, to long for something more. But I also know that holding on to bitterness, onto the need to punish others for our pain, it only makes the emptiness grow. Please, Mrs. Thorne, let Catherine go. For a long moment, Annabel said nothing. Then she turned away, moving to a table where a number of objects were laid out. Candles and crystals and items I could not identify. Very well, she said, her voice flat. I will perform the ritual to release her. But know this, Lord Greaves, when she is free, you will carry the memory of what you did to her for the rest of your life. There will be no absolution, no forgiveness, only the knowledge that you destroyed something pure and good. I understand, Lord Ashford said, and I will bear that burden willingly, if it means she can find peace. Annabel nodded and began to prepare. She lit candles and arranged them in a circle, then took a small knife and pricked her finger, allowing a drop of blood to fall onto a piece of parchment covered in strange symbols. She chanted in a language I did not recognize, her voice rising and falling in a rhythm that made the air itself seem to vibrate. I felt a coldness creeping into the room, a presence that was both familiar and terrifying, and I knew that Catherine was near. Lord Ashford reached for my hand, and I took it, allowing the vision to come. Catherine appeared, but she was different now, more solid, more real. She stood in the center of the circle, her eyes on Annabel, and I saw a flicker of something in her expression, not anger, but understanding. Annabel continued to chant, and the air grew colder still, the candles flickering wildly. Then, with a final word, Annabel sliced through the parchment, and the circle of candles flared bright before extinguishing all at once. The silence that followed was absolute. I could no longer feel the cold presence, could no longer sense Catherine's spirit. Lord Ashford stared at the empty space where she had stood, his face a mask of grief and relief. Is she gone?" he asked. Annabel nodded, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. "She is free," she said. "The binding is broken. She can move on now, to whatever lies beyond." Lord Ashford sank to his knees, his head bowed, and I saw tears streaming down his face. I knelt beside him, placing my hand on his shoulder, and he turned to me, pulling me into an embrace that was both desperate and grateful. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Elsie." I held him, feeling the weight of what we had accomplished, but also the sorrow of it. Catherine was free, but her story was a tragedy, a life cut short by betrayal and malice. And as I looked at Annabel, standing alone in the shadows, I saw the cost of her revenge, the emptiness that remained now that it was done. She met my gaze, and I saw tears in her eyes as well. Tears for what she had lost and what she had become. "Go," she said quietly. "Leave this place and do not return. I have nothing more to give you." We rose and made our way to the door, but before we left I turned back to her. "I am sorry," I said, "for your pain, for your loss. I hope that one day you find peace as well." Annabel did not respond, but I thought I saw the faintest nod, the barest acknowledgement of my words. Then we were outside, stepping into the cold morning air, and the door closed behind us with a finality that felt like the ending of a chapter. Lord Ashford took my hand, and together we walked back across the moor, leaving the dark house and its mistress behind, carrying with us the hope that redemption, however painful, was possible. The days that followed our confrontation with Annabel Thorne were strange and quiet, marked by an absence that felt both liberating and unsettling. Lord Ashford no longer saw Catherine's ghost in doorways or reflected in windows, no longer woke in the night with the sense of being watched by accusing eyes. The weight that had pressed upon him for so long had lifted, but in its place was a different kind of burden, the burden of memory and the knowledge of what had been lost. He grieved for Catherine anew, not as a haunting presence, but as a woman who had deserved better, who had been failed by the man she had trusted to protect her heart. We remained at the inn near the moor for 3 days, neither of us quite ready to return to the world beyond. Lord Ashford spent long hours walking alone across the heath, and I did not press him to speak or to share his thoughts. I understood that he needed time to come to terms with what had happened, to find a way to live with the guilt that would never fully leave him. I waited, reading in the small parlor or sitting by the window, watching the clouds move across the sky and thinking about the strange turn my life had taken. On the 4th morning, Lord Ashford came to my room and asked if I would walk with him. There was something in his manner, a quiet determination, that made my heart quicken. I agreed, and we set out together, following a path that led away from the inn toward a small copse of trees where the land dipped into a sheltered valley. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and growing things, and for the first time in weeks I felt a sense of peace. We walked in silence until we reached the edge of the trees, where a fallen log provided a place to sit. Lord Ashford gestured for me to join him, and we sat side by side, looking out over the valley. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, his voice quiet, "I have been thinking about the future." I glanced at him, my pulse racing. "And what have you concluded?" I asked. He turned to face me, and I saw in his eyes a vulnerability that made my breath catch. "I have concluded," he said slowly, "that I cannot return to the life I had before. I cannot go back to my estate and pretend that nothing has changed, that I am the same man I was a year ago. Catherine's death, her haunting, and everything that has happened since, it has shown me what truly matters. And what matters, Elsie, is not title or fortune or the approval of society. It is love, freely given and honestly received." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, his fingers warm and strong around mine. "I love you," he said, the words simple and unadorned. "I know that I have no right to ask anything of you, that the difference in our stations makes what I feel seem impossible. But I cannot hide the truth any longer. You have given me hope when I had none, compassion when I deserved only condemnation. You have stood beside me through darkness and danger, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears sprang to my eyes, and I struggled to find my voice. "I love you too," I said, the admission both a relief and a terror. "But you know as well as I do that society will never accept us. You are a lord, and I am nothing." He shook his head fiercely. "You are everything," he said. "You are kind and brave and wise, and I would rather face the scorn of every drawing room in England than lose you. I know the obstacles we will face, the whispers and the judgment, but I believe that we can overcome them, if you are willing to try." I looked at him, this man who had been broken and remade, who had faced his own guilt and emerged with a determination to do better, to be better. I thought of my life at the Black Hound, the endless repetition of pouring ale and wiping tables, the loneliness that had become so familiar I had stopped noticing it, and I thought of what I might have with him, not wealth or status, but partnership, love, a future built on honesty and mutual respect. "I am willing," I said, and his face lit with a joy so pure it took my breath away. He kissed me then, a gentle, tentative meeting of lips that deepened into something more, a promise and a beginning. When we finally drew apart, I was trembling, and he held me close, his cheek resting against my hair. "We will make it work," he murmured. "I swear to you, Elsie, we will find a way." The path we chose was not an easy one. When we returned to civilization, Lord Ashford wrote to his family, informing them of his intention to marry me. The response was swift and furious. His mother wrote that he was throwing away his name and his duty, that marrying a woman of my station would bring scandal upon their house and ruin any chance of advantageous alliances. His uncle, a prominent figure in Parliament, threatened to cut him off entirely, to ensure that he inherited nothing beyond the entailed estate. The letters were harsh, filled with disappointment and outrage, and I saw the pain they caused him. But Lord Ashford did not waver. He replied to each letter with calm, measured words, explaining that he had made his choice and would not be moved. He told them that I was a woman of intelligence and integrity, that I had helped him through the darkest period of his life, and that he would be honored to call me his wife. He did not ask for their blessing, only for their understanding, and when it became clear that understanding would not be forthcoming, he accepted it with a quiet dignity that made me love him even more. We were married in a small church in the village near the Black Hound, with only Godfrey and the vicar's wife as witnesses. I wore a simple gown of ivory silk that Lord Ashford had bought for me, and he wore a dark suit that made him look both solemn and hopeful. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar and weighty, and when the vicar pronounced us husband and wife, I felt a sense of rightness settle over me, as though the scattered pieces of my life had finally found their proper arrangement. Lord Ashford, I reminded myself, for he was simply Ashford to me now, took me to his estate in Lincolnshire, a grand house surrounded by fields and forests that stretched to the horizon. The servants were polite but distant, unsure of what to make of their new mistress, and I knew that earning their respect would take time and patience. But I was not afraid. I had faced ghosts and curses, had stood in the presence of a woman who wielded dark powers, and I could certainly navigate the intricacies of running a household. Ashford was patient with me, guiding me through the responsibilities and expectations without ever making me feel inadequate. He introduced me to the tenants, many of whom were wary at first, but warmed to me when they saw that I was willing to listen, to learn about their lives and their struggles. I visited the sick, brought baskets to new mothers, and slowly the community began to accept me, not as the lady they had expected, but as the lady they had been given. There were still whispers, of course, still those who looked down on me and judged Ashford for his choice. Invitations to balls and dinners dwindled, and the few we did receive were often tense affairs where I felt the weight of scrutiny on every word I spoke, every gesture I made. But Ashford stood beside me always, his hand at the small of my back, his presence a reminder that I was not alone. And in time, we found our own circle, people who cared more for character than for pedigree, who saw us for who we were rather than what society expected us to be. One evening, nearly a year after our marriage, Ashford and I sat in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth and the scent of old books filling the air. I was reading aloud from a volume of poetry, and he was listening with his eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. When I finished the poem, he opened his eyes and looked at me with such tenderness that my heart swelled. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Marrying me, leaving behind the life you knew?" I set the book aside and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in mine. "Not for a moment," I said. "My life before you was small and lonely, and while it was safe, it was not truly living. You have given me a world I never dreamed I could be part of. And more than that, you have given me love. How could I regret that?" He kissed my forehead, his touch gentle and reverent. "I feared," he said, "that you might come to resent the difficulties, the judgment of others." I shook my head. "Their judgment does not define me," I said, "and it does not diminish what we have. We have built something real, Ashford, something that is ours alone, that is worth more than all the approval in the world." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face, and I marveled at how far we had come, from a storm-lashed tavern and a haunted man to this moment of quiet contentment. Catherine's memory would always be with us, a reminder of the cost of betrayal and the importance of honoring those we love, but it no longer held us captive. She had found her peace, and in helping her find it, we had found our own. As the months turned to years, our life together deepened and grew. I bore Ashford a son, a bright-eyed boy we named Thomas, and then a daughter, Catherine, in honor of the woman whose death had brought us together. Ashford was a devoted father, patient and loving, and I saw in him a redemption that went beyond words. He had learned from his mistakes, had become a man who valued loyalty and kindness above all else, and he passed those values to our children. We never forgot the lessons of that dark time, the knowledge that actions have consequences that ripple far beyond what we can see. Ashford established a fund to support women in difficult circumstances, those who had been abandoned or betrayed, and I worked alongside him, using my own experience to offer comfort and guidance. It was our way of honoring Catherine, of ensuring that her suffering had meaning, that it led to something good. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the house was still and the children were asleep, I would think of the barmaid I had been, the girl who had believed herself invisible and unworthy of love. I would think of the ghost who had changed everything, of Annabel Thorne and her bitter magic, of the journey that had led me to this place, and I would feel a deep, abiding gratitude for all of it, the sorrow and the joy, the darkness and the light. One night, many years after that fateful storm, I stood at the window of our bedroom, looking out over the moonlit gardens. Ashford came to stand beside me, slipping an arm around my waist and pulling me close. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking," I said, "that life is strange and unpredictable, full of twists we cannot foresee. I am thinking that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes, and that love, real love, is worth fighting for." He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a life of meaning and purpose. The ghosts of the past no longer haunted us, but we carried their lessons with us, a reminder to cherish what we had and to never take for granted the gift of love freely given. As I stood there in Ashford's embrace, I felt a presence, faint and fleeting, like a whisper on the wind. I turned, half expecting to see Catherine standing in the shadows, but there was nothing, only the play of moonlight on the wall. And yet I felt something, a sense of peace and approval, as though she were watching over us, glad that her suffering had not been in vain, that it had led to something beautiful. "Thank you," I whispered, though I did not know if she could hear me. "Thank you for bringing us together, for showing us what truly matters." The feeling faded, leaving only warmth and contentment, and I knew that Catherine had truly moved on, that she was at rest. Ashford kissed my temple, and I leaned into him, closing my eyes and breathing in the scent of him, the scent of home. We had been given a second chance, both of us, a chance to love and be loved, to build a life free from the shadows of the past. And as I stood there, safe in my husband's arms, I knew that we would honor that chance, that we would live fully and love deeply for all the days we had been granted. The barmaid and the haunted lord had found their peace, and in doing so, had discovered that redemption was possible, that love could heal even the deepest wounds. It was a truth I would carry with me always, a light to guide us through whatever trials lay ahead, a promise that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come.